So again, I'd like to welcome you to today's TechNet webcast. This is Installing and Configuring Search in SharePoint Server 2007. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. We have Carl Kuhnhausen with us here again, and he's the Practice Director of Collaborative Solutions at All-In Consulting. So Carl, it's all yours.
Great, thanks Janet. Welcome everyone. We're at webcast 6 of our 8-part webcast series focused on installing and configuring Moss today, and with a particular interest in search. Last week we did Moss for Search, the specific search server product from Microsoft. And the following couple weeks we'll be presenting more detail on the Business Data Catalog and then installing and configuring protocol handlers for extending the search capabilities of Microsoft Search. So join us with that. And if you've missed the first 5 or any one of those, you can go back to TechNet, and those are all on demand, so you can register for those and download those or watch them online at your leisure. So today we're going to cover installing and configuring Moss, and with a particular interest again on search, focusing on people search, the Business Data Catalog search, and then tailoring your Search Center user interface. Last week we went through Moss for Search, and we're covering really the deltas in that. Now I'm going to be going pretty quickly on the install and configure, kind of the base one. We went over a lot of that last week, and it's very similar between the two products. But I want to go through that again and just highlight some of the key elements that are different between the two and the enhancements in Moss. So we'll look at the product matrix again, just to get a set of the features. The architecture, internal and external topology around what we're going to do for our demonstration today. So I have a 3-server farm in this environment, and we'll talk about some of the key decisions and installation and configuration elements you have to focus on to get your farms up and running correctly and in a performant way. And then we'll talk about some items to remember and just kind of take away as we go. I'm going to be heavy on demonstration today, light on slides, but I do want to give you a kind of a background or an overview of all the features of each of the products. So we talked about Microsoft Office SharePoint Server for Search last week, and today we're really focused on Moss, and I'm going to be installing the Enterprise CAL version of this. So this will give us all the features, including BDC and searching structured data sources with the BDC. And those are really the main deltas between the standard and the enterprise as far as search is concerned. There's some other features around Excel services and form services which we won't be going into today. So let's take a look at the architecture. We went over this, I think, in webcast 1 a bit. I wanted to bring it back just to review the internal architecture and how it works, and then how it's mapping to the physical infrastructure of our demonstration today. So at the base, we really have our content sources that we're drawing from. Again, external websites, SharePoint sites, Exchange public folders, business data with the BDC, network file shares, and then also Lotus Notes databases with some mapping that isn't shown here. The index engine with its protocol handlers and iFilters will crawl that data and then map and store all of that information in the search configuration database. And there's a number of tables within that that define it, as well as taking all of that content, breaking it, parsing it, and deploying it into the content indices or index, depending on how many servers you have in your farm, and if that gets propagated or not. And once that's completed, or as it goes, there's continuous propagation of that content index, where the query engine can then reference that, and via SharePoint, via custom applications, via the object model, end users can then issue queries and results. So just to give you a bit of a framework at a high level of what the internal architecture is looking like. So on the installation phases, there's really 4 phases we're going to go through today. We're going to deploy and configure the server infrastructure itself. We'll then create and configure an SSP, then create site collections, and in this case we're going to create a collaborative public collaborative publishing portal, usually the base MOS template that comes out of the box. You can also create a number of other templates based on that site collection, and specifically just a Search Center site, and I'll show how you could do that. And then configuring the user experience around that. Now for our demonstration today, looking at that topology, how this is mapped out physically in my environment, and what we'll be showing today is our database engine here is named MOS Demo SQL 2005, and this is where all the configuration data is stored in the MOS environment. We have our indexing engine here in MOS Demo Index, so that will be really separated and factored out for performance reasons, so we can focus our indexing just on one server and against all the different content sources. And then we'll have our query server, MOS Demo Web Front End, or WFE, to actually serve up queries and where the end user experience is going to be. Now again, in a production environment, you can scale this out to as many servers as you like, query servers and Web Front End servers. And again, one index server per SSP in this case. So let's go right to the demonstration then. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on how the environment is set up. So I'll go ahead and switch over to my sharing, and we'll look at the base installation and configuration. So we'll start off with really setting up on our first server. So in this case, this is Demo MOS Web Front End, and I want to go ahead and run setup on this for the MOS configuration. So I'm going to install the base product, enter a product key, usual software licensing terms. I accept that, of course. Continue on, and again, we're going to want to do advanced configuration or advanced installation. Basic installation is just going to give you SQL Server Express, really only useful for demo and kind of testing purposes, proof of concept purposes. So we'll go ahead and click Advanced and do a complete install. So complete installs are required for all index servers and query servers. You can do pure web front-end servers that don't have either of those services, but for now we want to do a complete installation. So again, you can choose your file location. I've taken the default. Best practice really is to map that to a drive that is not your OS drive or your OS volume, to a D drive or etc., something in your SAN if you have that. We'll go ahead and run installation. Now that usually takes about 10 minutes, 15 minutes depending on your hardware. I've cut down my demo here just for kind of demonstration and time purposes. This is about an hour-long installation. I've cut it down to about 10 to 15 minutes. So once the base is installed, you really come to the point of configuring it. So I install the base components. I'm going to run the configuration manager on my first server in this case. So again, I am looking at really creating a new server farm here. The default is connecting to the existing server farm, but I want to create a new server farm in this case because this is the first server in my server farm. It'll also default to the central admin site as well. So the things I do need as far as information is what SQL Server database I'm going to connect to. In this case, it's Demo MOS SQL 2005. It'll give me the standard database name for the configuration, SharePoint config. I'll take that as a default. And then I need my database access account. So I have a domain account here called Demo Farm, and I'll go ahead and enter those credentials in, hit Next. And then it will prompt me now once it's connected to the config database, it's going to want to know what central admin web app do I want to run. And I want to specify a port number in this case. The installation program brings up a random one. I'm going to set it to 8080, and so I can just remember it. It'll confirm what all my configuration parameters are here. So I have my SQL 2005 config DB, and I'm running against the 8080. And again, there's about 9 steps. This takes another 5 to 10 minutes to run through that configuration environment, just to configure everything, get all the configuration database squared away. And just a configuration confirmation of where, what database is pointing to, what server, and where my central admin is. So once I've finished that, I can go ahead and it will spin up my central admin site. So here's my first central admin site on my web front end. And this is where I can begin to do some configuration for the SSP a little bit later. So I've configured and installed my first server. That was Moss Demo or Demo Moss Web Front End. Now my second server is Demo Moss Index. And so I really want to bring that server up. So I'll switch to that environment and run the same process, again, against my installation media. And really set up exe, your usual product key, enter your accept licensing terms. And again, advanced, so I want to choose settings for advanced. And a complete install, because this is going to be the index server. So I've created the query server already, but I want to now create and configure the index server as my second box. So I'll go ahead and go through the configuration wizard. And again, the delta here is I'm connecting to an existing server farm, not creating a new one. I've already done that. And then entering again the database server name, and then retrieving all of the information associated with that. So it'll bring back my database name of all my configuration databases. In this case, I just have one named SharePoint config. And it will also retrieve back my account name, my database account name, demo-farm in this case, and I just have to enter in my credentials. And this will join that particular index server to the farm. And again, for all the successive servers that you may be joining to the farm, this is the same process. Only one index per SSP, so remember that. But as a number of query servers or web front ends as you want. Now, one thing I do want to do for now, and we'll talk about this in the security and how you set up your domain accounts, is I'm going to enable central administration on my index server too. And this just eases the starting of my index service without having to do it from a remote computer. And you can always disable this later. So I'm going to go ahead and use this machine to host another central admin just to ease the starting of the Office SharePoint Server search service. And again, I've just selected to make this a central admin site as well. So this is Demo Moss Index. It's inheriting port 8080, so it knows that's what the central admin is living on from my previous installation. And again, it'll go through the process here of configuring the whole environment for this server and then popping me into my central administration module. So you'll notice that it defaults to the web front end. So I'll just change that to index. So this is really running from my particular environment, my index server. So now I have the bits installed and configured on Demo Moss Web Front End and Demo Moss Index, my two servers in my farm for search. Now I want to really get to configuring the services. So here are all the services that are running currently on Demo Moss Index and Demo Moss Web Front End. But I need to enable my Office SharePoint Server search on both. So in order to do that, I need to look at all the services running on my server. And I'm going to come down and really start and configure the Office SharePoint Server search here. But before I do that, there's a key security element that we need to add. And this is one that people often miss, is I need to go in and add my demo or my farm search service account to my administrators group and to my WSS admin WPG group. And why this is key is there's a search ASMX, a search web service in the Office SharePoint Web Services that actually communicates amongst the farm to configure the search services. And unless you have your domain account set up for that and configured as an admin and in the WSS admin WPG group, you'll have all sorts of heartache where services will freeze. You'll have to dig into the diagnostic trace logs to actually find out what's going on. So to save you a little bit of, if you haven't done this before, to save you a little bit of headache, I've lived this in my own installations. Just go ahead before you start the service, add your farm search service account. In this case, it's demo-farm search. And we'll add it both to administrators and to WPG. And we'll do this on both servers. So we did that on the index server initially. I'm going to switch over to the web front-end server and do the same. We'll go into admin tools, computer management, and again add it to the administrator group and the WSS admin WPG group. and the same account, the demo farm search. So once we have that kind of symmetry of access, and we'll talk about some of the environments besides the web service that accesses that, then you're good to go to actually start these services successfully without running into any sort of security and permissioning issues. So we have those added now. So I can then go into, or go back to, in this case, my index server. So we'll go ahead and flip over to that. And I'll look at the search and indexing, and this is just a filtered view of the services that I want to run. I want to have Demo Moss Index really focused on search and indexing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that service and configure that. And again, I can choose whether it's a query server only or an indexing server. In this case, it's going to be an indexing server only. Give it some contact information, my farm search service account. Again, that was that same account that I added to the admin and WSS admin WPG group, the demo-farm search account. I'll take the default index file location, and again, that was early on when we had the file locations. You really want to put this on a non-volume or a non-OS volume. It defaults to the C data. But if I would have changed that on the installation. Now you can change that with STS-ADM at an SSP down the road if you failed or forgot to move that, or if you need to move it in the future for whatever reason. We're going to give it partly reduced indexing performance. And right now I'm going to use all web front ends for crawling. I could choose a dedicated web front end, but I'll talk about a technique to do that without selecting this particular radio button. So once we have that all configured, I can go ahead and hit OK. And so it's now configured, and I just click on my action to start it, and now my service is started on my index server. So that's good. So I have one part of the equation where I have my index server will now be able to crawl all that content. Now I need to switch back over to my query server in this environment, my web front-end server that has the queries, or to install the query services. And again, go to the Operations tab within Central Admin. Look at the services on this particular server. And again, I will look at my Office SharePoint search. You'll note that the service is running on server Demo Moss Index already, but it's not running on this particular machine. So I need to do the same process, or go through the similar process of configuring it. This time checking the use this server for search queries, because I already have an index server defined. And again, it's going to pick up my contact email address and my service account from the config DB, so I just need to add the credentials. And then the key item here is really propagation. So when the index is created on the index server, it gets propagated to each of the query services. So really it's just copying that content index to a file share. In this case, that file share is mapped to something called search index propagation. So I need to define the account that has the ability to copy those content indices between the servers and the server farm. And that's a demo farm search again. So I've configured it. I'm good to go. And I really just need to hit start and start up my search service. So now I have it running on both the index server and the web front-end server. So I have that symmetry that I need before I can really create my shared services provider. So we've installed the bits, configured the index services and query services, and then we can go to actually install and configure the shared service provider. Now before I do that, I do want to start up Windows SharePoint Services search, which again, we talked about it last week. This provides search on the help. So whenever I go to the question mark in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, I can issue any queries against the help files and quickly get access to information. So I have a WSS help search domain account to map to that. So I'll go ahead and set that service account and content access account. It'll default to a database name and give me a default indexing schedule. I'll go ahead and take that. So now I have all my search services started on in my farm. So good. I'm good to go here now to create my shared services provider. And again, if you don't install and configure your index server at least before that, you try to go to shared services provider, it won't allow you to actually install it in one of the screens. So it'll tell you, but that's just to get that all out of the way. And then we can go to our SSP and create a new SSP. The default names, shared services. There's no web application running right now. I'm going to go ahead and create a new web application. I've edited down that process. It's basically setting up some domain accounts. But I've created an SSP on port 8081 in this case. And I'm going to rename my shared services 1 to SSP1, just because I don't like taking the default name there. But you can name this whatever you want. And I would use some sort of naming convention that indicates a numbering or a chronology scheme or some sort of specificity to what it's doing itself. So I have my web app. I just need to add my service credentials for that. Again, a domain account. I have demo SSP in this case. And I'm going to map that to my database so I can keep those in sync just as far as the naming convention. And so I'll just name all this SSP1 for the search DB. And again, the search DB, the search underscore DB, is that search configuration database. So that's where all that metadata, properties, etc. around the search service is stored. And as I mentioned in the performance and capacity planning webcast, this is the most hit as far as a read-write, especially most writes in the farm, is your SSP database. So as you run your crawls, gathering all the properties from all the content sources, there'll be a lot of writes to that DB, so you want to make sure that's on a performant SQL Server box. So I'll go ahead and take that. Now, I did this on purpose to note one of the deltas between MOS for search and MOS, and that is the My Sites. And what I failed to do here is to create a separate web application for my My Sites. And the install will warn us of that for a security reason. I really want to go back and create a separate web app that my My Sites can live on. And then really a best practice is to map a DNS host header name to that, so I can have mysites.allincal.com or My Sites, so people can easily access that. So I'm going to go back to the search configuration, and you'll note the My Site location here is on the 8081 web application where my SSP is. I don't want that. And that's what it was warning me. So I'll create a new web app on 8082 in this case, so that I can actually factor that out for backup restore, for security, etc. So again, creating that new web app is just creating some accounts and mapping some of the virtual servers within IIS. This is just an easy way to do it so you don't have to go over to IIS and do this sort of configuration. Now probably I should use some different credentials. I'll just use the SSP credentials for now and then go ahead and hit OK. So now I'm good to go. I have my business data catalog mapped and installed, my Office SharePoint Server Search, Excel services, my user profile application for My Sites and searching on the My Site profile info, as well as the session state management service. So now what I've done, got my bits, all my Office SharePoint Server Search farm is installed and configured, and now my base SSP is configured for that indexer. And there it is, all there with the My Sites, and I'll go actually to the SSP itself, and I look at the search settings. And this is one thing I didn't do, and it actually warned me when I created this, is you'll note that my propagation status, so it's propagating my new query to my new query server, demo MOS WFE. Until you do an IIS reset, that will hang there and just stay on initializing. So probably should have done an IIS reset before I created the shared service provider itself when I created those web apps, but I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll quickly go on my web front end first. We'll do an IIS reset, and then I'll go back over to my index server and do an IIS reset as well. So this ensures that propagation will actually happen, and we'll come back to the web front end once this is restarted. So I'll minimize this environment, go back to my web front end, and back to that same page within shared central admin. So again, another way to get to central admin is really through all programs, Office SharePoint Server 3.0 central admin. And again, I'll go to my SSP1, back to my search settings. And now my propagation status is idle. So good. I have a base environment set up now. This will take you in real time. It's taking us about 10-15 minutes. In real time, it will take you about 2 hours to work through, depending on your hardware, for that installation. Now, the final thing I really need to do is create a web application and a site collection to actually run my MOS environment, my MOS search environment on. So I want to do this on port 80. Just want to create a default one on demo MOS WFE. So I went ahead and I created that web application already. And I want to map a base site collection or create a base site collection on that. So we'll call this MOS demo search or site. And this will be for search specifically. We'll look at that, but it'll be a MOS demonstration site. And then this is where I can pick my templates. Now you'll want to go to the enterprise templates in this case. There's the usual templates for meetings, collaborations. So the enterprise templates, I could do the search center site. So if my environment, if I wanted to create my environment where I had a dedicated search center, much like a live.com or a place where I could just go to a URL and that's all it is search, I could pick the search center template or the search center template with tabs. So this is much like what's out of the box with MOS for search. But in this case, I'm going to go to the Publishing tab and select the collaboration template, the base template, the collaboration portal template. What most of you have seen if you've done any installs or seen any demos of MOS. And then I'll go ahead and add the primary and secondary site collections for this. So I'll add myself, and I'll add Stefan Nilsson, who's handling all the questions as they're coming in, and we'll be the primary and secondary owners. And then I'll go ahead and create that site collection. So I'll spin that up, and then I'm going to navigate specifically to the Search tab. And again, this is similar to the environment where, or the environment in MOS for search, a similar environment. So now I basically have my full base install. So these are all the steps you need to go through for a farm environment to actually install the base search functionality. Now once I've gotten the baseline established, I want to create and configure this specifically for my environment. And one of the first steps that I like to do is, because most have a lot of PDF files, is I like to enable the PDF iFilter. I talked about that last week a little bit. We had some questions on how you go about doing that, so I wanted to step through that quickly. So first step really is to stop your IS admin service. So for any iFilter that you're installing, you want to basically stop all your services on the installing server. So I'll go ahead and stop that. That'll stop my W3 service and publishing service. And then once that's stopped, I can go ahead and install the iFilter from my MSI. So I have my Adobe iFilter here, 6.0. I'll go ahead and double click on that. And this is a quick install. It takes a few seconds really, or less than a minute. And it's just a next, 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 accept sort of installation. Pretty straightforward. So once that's all installed, there's a couple other configuration parameters we need to set on the server itself. So have the base install. I want to go ahead and add the icon for the PDF. I want to get that little 16 by 16 icon so it'll show up in my search results and in my document libraries. And I just need to copy that to my common files directory. So it's all the way down in the usual common files, shared web server extensions, 12 template images. So I'll paste that right into here. And then I need to go into the XML directory and edit the doc icon XML. So these are where all the doc icon mappings are. And I just need to open that. I'll open it in Notepad for now. And there's a set of mapping keys by the actual file extension and then what icon that it's picking up out of that particular directory. And so I'll go ahead and I have one already here in Notepad. So my mapping key is PDF. I'll paste it right in. I like to paste it in alphabetically, so I put it right in the proper place. And it's mapping to that icpdf.gif. So that's all the server config, and you have to do this on every web front-end server that's serving up content. But pretty straightforward, and it'll take you in real time, maybe 10 minutes, 5 minutes to do. So I do need to do an IIS reset. And then I have one final step, is I need to go back to Central Admin and add that file type to the particular search configuration. So I'll go to my SSP and search configuration, and I need to add that to the file types list. So I'll create a new file type, and again, without a dot extension, just type in PDF, hit OK, and now you're good to go. So now on my next crawl, and there's my icon, on my next crawl I'll actually pick up and crack open any PDF files that are in my content sources and place that in the index. Great. So let me swap over to my base environment. I'm going to go to my web front end. And I'll get back on here. So I have my search center. So I've done a little bit of configuration since I've installed. So just in the interest of time. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to go to and navigate to the central administration. We did have a question come in about the PDF filter. Now currently it is only 32-bit. Now from what I've been reading on the blogs, in the iFilter blogs, you can actually go to blogs.msdn.com/iFilter and learn more than you ever wanted to know about iFilters. But Adobe is working on a 64-bit version as well. Currently that is not available. So if you're installing on 64-bit hardware for the time being, you will not be able to use or crawl or crack open PDF files. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my shared service provider here. And again, it's really configuring my search settings. And I have a number of content sources that I have created already, 5 in this case. I have 1,241 items. I've ran a few crawls since the install. I'll go ahead and look at those content sources, give you a feel for those. So we have our local SharePoint services sites, or local SharePoint sites. I'm crawling our public website, allin.com. I'm crawling a file share. I'm also crawling a Windows SharePoint Services 2.0 project site. And then I'm also crawling some line of business data or a SQL Server database, some resellers information. And we'll focus on some of that in a moment. Now one thing I note is I'll go back to Search Center, and we'll just issue some queries real quickly here. So the usual ones for on search, just to show there's some search result sets coming back. On people, we'll talk about how people information is configured here in a moment. I'll search on people. Oops, need to enter my name in here. And we'll get some information back from the profile database, which will map actually to my site. So if I click onto that, I can map over to my site and find other people in the organization that are imported from AD. We'll talk about that in a moment. As well as I can search on resellers right now, or I'm scoped to resellers. Now one thing that I find actually a bit annoying is, and I find a lot of customers this way, is within SharePoint there's the list, the set of lists, which is really mapped to many times all items.aspx. And for searches, I don't find this very helpful for end users. It tends to put a lot of chaff into the index. And so if I go to, say, one of the pages library, in this case I have one page in it, but if I was to have hundreds of pages in this library and I have some sort of search, I'm not really sure what's coming back. I'd rather go to the specific item itself to get any search results back. So I want to create a crawl rule to actually remove all this from the index. So I have that as my content source, and it's really crawling against my local site, my MOS site. But I'm going to go back to my search settings and add a new crawl rule. So I have a number of crawl rules set up already that are focusing on and removing different ASPX files, or including specific ASPX files, specific areas. And this is one that I always want to exclude, is the underscore layouts directory. I really don't want to crawl any admin or items or admin pages. So I have a crawl rule already created here for getting rid of and removing all of those all items. So I basically is saying, I could focus this on all items.aspx, but there are a number of ASPX files like webfldr, all pages, ASPX, etc., that just aren't really useful for search results. So I'm going to go ahead and create that crawl rule to manage that. So I'll create a new crawl rule. And again, it's just adding that. And in this case, I want to exclude all those items. And until I run another crawl, we'll go ahead and run another full crawl so we can purge those out of the content index. Again, going back over to my content sources and then starting a full crawl. And so we'll let that run in the background while we look at some other features, and just to show how you can remove that from your index. The next thing that's very useful that I find for end users, besides removing a lot of the chaff from the index itself, is being able to provide property searching. So out of the box, and we talked about this before, I may have some custom properties coming from other environments that I want to map. So in this case, I've done one already, and we'll create a new one. I have one called Reseller City, focused on resellers. And I want to bring back in my result sets just resellers, in this case, that are in the city of Seattle, or any city that I may have in my database. So I've went ahead and issued that query with that property, and that's going to bring back only specific resellers. In this case, this is the AdventureWorks database I'm using in the background here, the sample database that comes with SQL Server 2005. Only environments that come back in Seattle, or excuse me, they come back with the city of Seattle. So if I go back to that same search and remove Seattle, you'll see I get a few more. Well, maybe in this one I didn't. I don't have enough here in my environment. Let's try, I'll try California in general. So I have 134 items here in California. And I actually want to do a property, or create a new property to show how we can further refine that environment. So I already created Reseller City, but to map and create new properties, they all get crawled and they're stored in the content database, the search configuration database rather, but I need to actually map those pieces of metadata to make them visible to front end or to end users. So I'm going to go to metadata property mapping. And you'll note here that I have a number that are out of the box, and then I've created already, I'll scroll down here to the R's. I already have Reseller City. And you'll note here that Reseller City is mapping to the AdventureWorks Data Warehouse Instance Reseller City. So let's go ahead and create a new one just on state. So I can say, show me everything that's in California or everything that's in Washington. So to do that, we'll go ahead and create a new managed property. We'll call it Reseller State. And it's just a text. And I want to add the mapping. So this is where my mappings to crawl properties are. And again, I can select from a number of different categories. In this case, it's business data. And next week, we're going to drill in much more detail into the business data catalog. I'll reference it a bit here, but we'll talk about how to actually create those for search. So I'll select business data, and you'll note that here are all the crawl properties that are coming back from that business data catalog. And these are a set of columns in a table in the AdventureWorks database that are getting crawled by the indexer. So one of those is either state province name or state province code. So that would be CA or California. I'm going to do the code just because I'm a lazy typist. Hit OK. And so I'm mapping reseller state to this particular state province code. Go ahead and hit OK. and then I do need to run a crawl to enable that. So I'm going to go back to my content sources, specifically my reseller, and I'll go ahead and do a full crawl. While that's crawling, I will show the actual BDC application registration. So again, we'll go into more detail on this next week. But in order to enable search on the BDC or on BDC or line of business data, you do need to import a application into the business data catalog here. So this is really just an XML file. We'll get into the details of it. I'll give you a quick preview of one. Enough XML to make your eyes bleed, and we'll talk about the elements of this next week. But it really is an XML file defining my connection information, table information, search enablement to the business data catalog service. So we'll go ahead and it's purely just pointing to that file and importing it. There it is. I've already imported it, so I won't go through that again. So once it imports, it'll actually process it, make sure your XML is the correct schema, etc., and give you a success or failure. Once it is imported, I can then view my applications, and I do have my AdventureWorks data warehouse instance here with a specific reseller entity, and that's where this is bringing back all this information. It's really a crawlable entity. And here are all those columns we were just looking at. One of those is state province code that we were just referencing. So let's go back to our crawler, see if we're done crawling in the SSP. I'll go to my search configuration. Again, it's all in search settings in your SSP. And it looks like I'm good. So now let's search on, so we can search on California before we got those results back. Let's go ahead and search on CA. Issue a query on that. And again, I'm getting 265 results if I'm not scoped on resellers. But I'll go ahead and say reseller state :CA. And now I'm getting 78 back from that environment. And again, these are all the reseller specific information that's coming from my reseller scope here in this case. So 78 of those. Again, this is a way you can quickly enable property search, and this can be on any SharePoint store, any BDC store, any web page, and there's a set of properties on all those crawl properties the crawler brings in, and you just need to map it to something that an end user can interact with that same name value :delimited pair. Great, so I have my search environment. I have the ability to map properties. I can add scopes and actual tabs. We did a little bit of that in a week before. I'll come back to that in a moment. I want to show some more kind of advanced configuration before we go into that. Now, one thing we found as we built these out, configuration is often through your configuration settings and mapping all your metadata properties, your content sources, your keywords and best bets, etc., and can be a very manual process. What we found is leveraging Windows PowerShell as an administrative tool against the object model can help to really speed and help manage all of this so you're not having to go back to the UI all the time. Or if you're moving from farm to farm, say in a dev stage production environment, you can easily use PowerShell to migrate that content with some configuration parameters. So let me show some of that, of how you go about doing that and some key elements of it. So I'm going to start up Windows PowerShell. Now this is a free download from Microsoft.com. There's a great TechNet webcast that was produced in February on how to use PowerShell. I won't go into the details on that. I've changed the default color for just visibility. It usually comes up in kind of a light blue. But I'm going to go ahead and go to a specific directory. In this case, my scripts directory. And I have a set of Windows PowerShell scripts to enable administration of SharePoint itself. Now, before I go into that, I do want to give a little context for those who might be a little bit more focused on development or even admins, just the object model around the shared service provider of how you can interact with this. So the central admin and SSP is just front-ending this object model. So my search service, search context, and then I have my content sources, like we were just looking at, whether it be allin.com, file shares, etc. My metadata property schema, so that's where that reseller city is living. My search scopes, keywords and best bets, any sort of ranking, propagation status, and then my crawl log. So this is all accessible via PowerShell. So let me go back to PowerShell and actually bring some of that up. So I'm not going to go into all the syntax. Variable names are prefaced with the $sign. And I'm going to create a new object here. And it's in the Microsoft SharePoint SP site. And I just need to pass the URL of my particular site in this case. And so this is demo web front end as a string. And so now I have it'll grab my site and put that in memory. And again, PowerShell is not a text-based scripting environment, like Corn Shell or Bourne Shell or C Shell or anything on the Unix environment. It really is full .NET object. So if I do $site, I have that entire object in memory. And so you're really looking at my particular root site for DemoMOS WFE. So once I have my site, the key thing for search configuration, just clear the screen here, the key thing for search is grabbing a search context. So I'll just name that SC for now. And this is the one difference in PowerShell is I want to create a, really bring in a static member for this. And this is the thing that that will trip a lot of people up within PowerShell. So this is in the search administration class, and I want to grab my search context, I could spell, of this particular environment. And this is a static method, so it's get context, and I need to pass it that site that I just created. And so that's $site. So what I'm saying is I'm getting the search context for my search administration, and that will then enable me to get access to all my objects within the environment. So I'll go $sc, there's my server context and search context. And so now I can say $sc equal, or excuse me, $content. So let's say I want to grab my content sources. Let's just name it CS. Content sources equals new object. And this is Microsoft.office.server.search. So these are long ones. Administration.content sources. I think that's with an S, if I'm remembering correctly. And I just need to pass in the server context. This is the key thing that you need to note when you're creating these. And again, I'll show a function here, and I probably is content source. Make sure I have my spelling correctly. And I always have my cheat sheet here, so I can quickly bring up my environment here. And I just want to make sure I have the right content source. Oh, that's what yeah, it's content. So it's really content here. Great, so I have my search context, create that new object. Now I can say $content sources. And it'll take a little bit just to retrieve that from the object model. And this will bring back a top-level object that I can interact with and show all my content sources. Now again, I can just look at this specifically, and here's all my content sources in an array or a collection. So there's my local Office SharePoint server sites, allin.com, the Walnut Creek file share, etc. And I can even get access specifically to those with just dot notation. So I'll go content sources. And boom, there are all my content sources. I'll go ahead and and you'll see all the details. So what's nice too is I can get access to, so my Walnut Creek file share was, it took a minute, roughly actually a little less than a minute to actually crawl from the last crawl. So I can get access to all the object model via PowerShell. So you can do some very cool stuff with this, both administration, just reading and interacting with it for a reporting basis, or actually writing data to specifically upload, say, a set of keywords and best bets into the environment from an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file. Something that's a little tedious to do via the web interface, much easier to do just to blow it all out into a spreadsheet and then create a PowerShell script to upload and save all that into the object model. So some very cool stuff. I really encourage you to check out PowerShell and interact with all of the object model within SharePoint for that. So let's go back to our actual search environment. And we'll look at our keywords best bets. I want to show a couple other features here before we wrap up. One is keywords and best bets. They really live at the site collection level. So I've created one on job. So you'll note here my keywords best bet web part will, I've mapped job to a specific website on, in this case just our all-in website in our career section for hiring, for example. Even though you'll note here some things are coming back, some specific jobs for our Pennsylvania office within my all search within allin.com itself. But I can choose to highlight some of those. And there really are a set of web parts behind the scenes that are mapping all this. There's that set of 9 web parts. One of those is the search best bets web part. And again, for the user experience, you can configure, add, remove, change any of these web parts that you want, or change the properties on that. So to actually manage those, it is within the site collection. So I need to go to my site settings to do that. And let's go ahead. I want to go to modify all settings and back up to the top level. So this is really at the root of my demo MOS WFE application. And here it's within site collection administration. So here are my search keywords, for example. And right now I just have the one. So now hiring, some best bets, etc. And really adding keywords, like you can see, going through a keyword addition is really what your phrase is, your set of synonyms for that, adding specific best bets, adding a definition, adding contact and publishing information. Something that PowerShell, and using PowerShell will be much easier to have a whole set of these as opposed to going through, let's say, at 100 different keywords and phrases and best bets. I don't necessarily want to go into the UI and continue to add these by hand. PowerShell is just a much more powerful environment to do that within. You can also create managed code, C# code to do this too as well against the object model. So here are my best bets. Again, I can edit those best bets. I can add new best bets around that. And it's really just mapping a URL with a title and a description to that. So just to keep that in mind, the keywords and best bets live at the site collection level or the site level, not the SSP or the farm level. So let's add a little bit more user experience here. So I have my resellers tab. I've already created that. So I can implement search and get results back just for that specific environment. One thing people were asking for or asking about was the did you mean capabilities. So I need to misspell something here. Now, one of the web parts is the did you mean web part, and again, that is available out of the box. In this case, I mistyped SharePoint, so I can do a did you mean. It'll reissue that query on SharePoint. Now you note there's nothing in my resellers tab or reseller scope that is set to SharePoint. So I'll go ahead and go back to all sites and then bring back some SharePoint information. Now, a quick way to add tabs is really, and scopes, is really through the a set of pages and editing that particular page. So in this case, I'll go ahead and well, we've edited this page here, and show that you can add new tabs or edit existing tabs. And this is really all you have to go through, is adding a couple pages for your search and search results, and then editing or adding those new tabs. So for example, my resellers tab here is mapped to resellerresults.asp.aspx. And that particular page is scoped to a particular scope within SharePoint for resellers. So if I created back in my configure my search settings, I have some scopes. In this case, I have all sites, people, and resellers, and I'm just mapping that reseller scope specifically against a content source. So in this case, I'm looking at my content source of resellers, which is really coming from the BDC. And all I need to do is map that back to my core results web part within that search results page to bring that, that tab search results back. So when I actually go to that page, we'll go ahead and go back to my, my search environment. For resellers, let me just search on reseller city Seattle again. And you notice I edit this particular page. I'll want to go to my core search results here and map that scope. And again, it happens to be under miscellaneous, as I've noted before. A lot of the important elements are in miscellaneous. So here's my reseller scope. That's telling me that mapped to that particular tab in this page, I'm just going to bring back data from my BDC resellers data source. So one final thing, and then we'll wrap up, is the big difference, and we looked at it already, was people search. So I'll search for Stefan's name here under people in this case. And again, this is where I enable my profile database and my MySite capabilities. And this all comes back to my profile import from in the SSP itself. So configuring that is really pretty straightforward, and we'll go into this in more detail next week, where we can talk about augmenting that with BDC-oriented data as we talk about the BDC. But again, it's really within search settings, or excuse me, the SSP itself, and then my user profiles and properties. And so all you have to do is configure this particular environment for importing from our current domain, run an import, and then I have those profiles available for the search and indexing. So once I go back and run a full crawl or an incremental crawl on my local content sources and my local SharePoint sites here, all my people search will be enabled by default. So this is something that's not available for the MOS for search SKU, only for the MOS SKU, because the My Sites and profile sources are tied within that. Well, good. I know I've been running at about 1,000 miles an hour, but I wanted to get through a lot of features of the basic installation of MOS for search, or MOS and its search capabilities. Let me return back to my slide deck. So just a few things to remember as you're installing and configuring, that the actual install account must be in the admin group. You do need to install and configure the SharePoint Server Search Service before you spin up your SSP, and I showed how you can do that. And again, if you want to do dedicated web front-end crawling right now, there are some issues if you have multiple NICs in your farm and the way it interacts with it. So best just to go to your host file on the indexer and map your crawler name, DNS name, to the indexer IP address. That way you're not making an extra hop. You're just basically crawling yourself back to the database. It's not having to go off to one of the web front ends or another server or a round-robin server within, or a load balance server within your farm. You can dedicate it and keep it minimally hopping over the network. And then if you are having trouble with index propagation, check your trace logs, and then also look at that the security that I showed on the admin and the WSS admin WPG, because it's trying to access that search admin ASMX file to actually copy the files between the farm itself. Great, here's a few resources, and I know we have a number of questions that Stefan's been fielding, but I'll turn it back over to Janet, and then we can take a few minutes to answer some of those questions in real time.
Thanks, Carl. I just want to remind everybody that our next webcast in this series is March 28th, and that is Extending Search in Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007, Exposing Line of Business Data with the Business Data Catalog. If any of you are looking for any of the previously recorded webcasts that have happened in this, they are, if you go into your resource panel, or the custom panel, excuse me, and you can do that by going to your view menu and choosing your restore default layout, and you'll see your custom panel. All of the webcasts in this series are posted in there, so I'd like to point that out. As Carl mentioned, if you have questions for him, now is the time to make sure to get those into the question queue. We're going to get to them in just a moment here. We do record these webcasts, as I mentioned, so all the previously recorded webcasts, as well as anything that's coming up, they're all posted on our Microsoft site at microsoft.com/webcast. If you have content ideas, anything you want to see us do differently, we'd love hearing from our audience, and we do take those comments. We do try and implement those, so let us know. Today's webcast was presented using the Microsoft Office iMeeting technology. There is a free 14-day trial. Just need to go to microsoft.com/presentlive. You'll be able to get that. And I do want to point out that if you can be eligible for TechEd 2007 Conference Pass, we are giving away a pass to this. So all you have to do is attend 3 live or on-demand enterprise search webcasts, so anything in this series, and complete the survey, and you'll be able to be entered into a drawing to win that. Or you can do 3 enterprise search virtual labs and also be entered as well. So the rules are all posted right here. And I will point out too, if you'd like to print a PDF of these slides, you can do so by going into your File menu in your upper navigation bar. You'll be able to get a printed PDF and have all of these resources available for you. In addition, for filling out our survey, you'll also be entered into a drawing to win this great little Zoom digital media player. So we have quite some incentives there to get your feedback, but really it's very important to us. So please do take a moment, fill it out before you log out. We do appreciate that. And we do pass along your information on to our presenters, so they like to hear it so they can better implement for their next week's session. So with that, Carl, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you wrap up with a couple of these questions we have in the queue.
Great, thanks, Janet. So a couple of these that I've been talking with Stefan about. One was specifically on central admin. So the TechNet prescriptive architecture for Monster Search specifically talks about having central admin just on one server. And I concur with that. It's really on the install process, and this is just something I've found in the real world, is getting that propagation account working and starting your SharePoint, Office SharePoint services from a remote machine has just caused me a little bit of heartache. So to get around that, I just install central admin on all the machines initially just to start the services, and then you can just disable it and keep it on one server. So that would be really the best practice for backing it off. I have them still running on 2 servers, but you can just shut that website down or remove the central admin service from your indexer in that case.
One more question that was asked during the session was you made a reference to putting the binaries on a separate drive from the data. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So I think the point I'm trying to make is more on the data and logs for all the diagnostic trace logs, the search propagation, the content indices. You'll want to keep that on a separate volume than your operating system for perf and management. That was really what I was getting at.
And we have one question about why the PDF was mapped to a GIF, and I think that was probably an icon.
Yeah, I think that was just some confusion. That the icon, the little 16 by 16 icon that shows the PDF, is a GIF file. And that's all that is. It's not actually mapping physically to the GIF file type. It's just the icon that shows up when you see it in a document library or in a search result.
And 2 more questions. What end user access is required to the business data catalog for users to be able to search on data that is exposed there?
Yeah, it really is the base. I think I had elevated access there. We'll talk about that more next week. It really is just frankly, the options are failing me right now, but it's just basically the select capability. So I don't need to have I think it's the execute to just bring back the search results. And we'll talk about those in detail next week and how to set those up, how those interact with web parts as well. And I know that there's been some questions on the did you mean capabilities, and that really is something that's just out of the box. So there's a did you mean or a summary web part that has did you mean functionality. So it will key on a base lexicon of misspelled words for your language and language packs that you have installed, and then give you appropriate spellings to that.
And the last question we have are around web parts, a little off topic, but around web parts that you develop in Visual Studio and ASP.NET 2.0, whether or not they're compatible with MOS.
Absolutely. Yes, so that's one of the strengths of MOS 2007 is you can create web parts, ASP.NET 2.0 web parts, and have them live happily within the MOS environment. In fact, we do that quite a bit for especially custom-facing, public-facing custom websites that we build for customers. We find that oftentimes we don't need a lot of the object model within Office SharePoint Server, and we want to really streamline that and make it really lean for performance reasons. And so we just build base ASP.NET 2.0 web parts, and it works quite happily with MOS. Well, great. Well, thanks for your time, everyone, today. Again, my email address is carlk@allincal.com, so feel free to send me any questions or comments. Next couple of weeks, we'll be focusing on the BDC next Wednesday, and then protocol handlers the week after that. So I'll turn it back over to you, Janet.
Great. Well, thanks. I'm just going to remind everybody one more time that your feedback really is very valuable to us. So if you could just please take a moment and fill out that survey before you log out, we do appreciate that. And I'd like to close with extending a special thanks to both Carl and Stefan. Carl for a wonderful presentation, and Stefan for helping out there on the back end there. We're getting all your questions answered throughout this presentation. So thanks so much, guys. And that concludes today's TechNet Live meeting. We hope to see you all back next week, and thanks so much for joining us.